Welcome to Whispers in the Dark. Tonight, we travel to a town where the windows are boarded from the inside, where an abandoned theater waits at the edge of a black and restless sea, and where the dead do not scream. They perform. Turn down the lights, put on your headphones, make certain every door in the room is closed, and should you hear someone applauding from somewhere behind you, whatever you do, do not turn around. Our story begins in the coastal town of Saltgrave, a place that had been dying for so long that nobody could remember when it had truly been alive. The town stood between a wall of dark pine forest and a gray ocean that threw itself against the cliffs with relentless fury. Its narrow streets twisted uphill from the harbor, lined with crooked houses whose roofs sagged under generations of rain. Salt had whitened the bricks. Rust coated the iron fences. Curtains remained drawn even in daylight. Above everything, perched on the highest cliff, stood the Saltgrave Grand Theatre. Once it had been the pride of the coast. Its marble columns had welcomed wealthy visitors in evening gowns and polished shoes. Golden lamps had burned along its balconies. Music had poured from its doors and drifted across the town like perfume. Now the building looked like a rotting crown. Its copper roof had turned green. Several windows were broken, and the heavy velvet curtains behind them stirred even when the air was still. Stone angels crouched above the entrance, their faces eroded by rain until their expressions resembled silent agony. The theater had been closed for 34 years. Everyone in Saltgrave knew why. No one spoke about it. 28-year-old Elliot Crane had spent most of his life trying to forget the town. He had left at 17 with one suitcase and a hatred so fierce that it felt like armor. He went to London, found work restoring antique furniture, and built a quiet life among objects that could be repaired. Tables could be strengthened. Chairs could be reupholstered. Rotten wood could be removed and replaced. People were more difficult when the call came informing him that his mother was dead. Elliot sat alone in his workshop for almost an hour, staring at the thin curls of wood scattered across his workbench. The caller was a woman named Narration, the caretaker of the Saltgrave Cemetery. Elliot remembered her as a pale girl who used to sit behind him in school and draw pictures of birds with human teeth. Nora told him that Evelyn Crane had been found at home. She had died 3 days earlier. No one had known until the smell reached the neighboring house. Elliot had not spoken to his mother in 11 years. He returned to Saltgrave on a wet November afternoon. The bus left him beside the harbor and drove away before he could retrieve his second bag from beneath the shelter. Its red lights vanished through the rain, leaving him alone with the stink of seaweed, diesel, and dead fish. The town seemed smaller than he remembered. It also seemed emptier. A fisherman stood beneath an awning across the road. The old man looked at Elliot, recognized him, and immediately lowered his eyes. Elliot pulled his coat tighter and began walking uphill. His mother's house stood at the end of Candle Street, leaning between two larger buildings like a frightened child. The paint had peeled from the front door. Damp crawled across the stone walls in dark green veins. A police notice had been fixed beside the entrance. Elliot tore it down. Inside, the air was cold and sweet with decay. The authorities had removed the body, but death remained in the house. It clung to the wallpaper and seeped from the floorboards. Every room smelled faintly of rotting flowers. Elliot found Nora waiting in the kitchen. She had grown into a tall, narrow woman with black hair cut evenly at her jaw. Her skin was colorless, and her eyes were so dark that the pupils seemed to have swallowed the irises. She wore a long brown coat and held a ring of keys in one gloved hand. "I am sorry," she said. Elliot placed his bag on the kitchen table. "You said she died 3 days before anyone found her." Nora nodded. "How?" "The doctor called it heart failure." Elliot looked around the kitchen. Plates remained stacked beside the sink. A mug sat on the table, a brown circle of dried tea coating its bottom. "You do not believe him." Nora's gaze shifted toward the hallway. "No." Elliot noticed a deep scratch in the wooden doorframe. Then another. 5 parallel lines had been carved into the wood, beginning near the floor and climbing almost to the ceiling. What happened here? Nora removed a folded document from her pocket and placed it on the table. "Your mother left instructions. The house belongs to you now. So does everything inside it. I do not want it." She knew you would say that. Elliot unfolded the paper. His mother's handwriting shook across the page. "Elliot, there is something beneath the house. I should have destroyed it years ago, but I was afraid. Your father believed he could control it. I believed him. Do not take it to the theater. Do not allow it to hear applause. And Elliot, if it speaks in my voice, do not answer." He read the final line twice. "What is beneath the house?" Nora did not respond. A soft creak came from the hallway. Elliot turned. The kitchen door stood open. Beyond it, the passage stretched toward the staircase. The wallpaper was covered with faded blue flowers. At the far end, shadows gathered beneath the stairs. Something moved in those shadows. Elliot stepped into the passage. "Mom," the word escaped before he could stop it. Nora seized his arm. Her fingers were painfully cold. "Do not." Elliot pulled away. A shape sat beneath the staircase. It was small, perhaps the size of a child, covered in a gray sheet. Elliot stared at it. The sheet rose and fell. Once, twice, as though something beneath it was breathing. Nora whispered his name, but he crossed the hallway and reached for the cloth. He pulled it away. A wooden figure sat on a chair. It resembled a little girl of perhaps 8 years old. Its body had been carved from dark walnut, polished until the surface shone like wet skin. It wore a yellow dress, stained brown at the collar. Black curls framed a painted porcelain face. The eyes were glass, one blue, one green. Its lips were parted in a delicate smile. Inside its mouth, behind 2 rows of tiny ivory teeth, rested a human tongue. Elliot staggered backward. The tongue was gray and swollen. Black thread had been pushed through it, stitching it to the puppet's wooden jaw. Nora covered the figure with the sheet. Elliot felt the contents of his stomach rise. What is that? Her name is Lottie. That is not what I asked. Your father made her. Elliot stared at Nora. His father, Arthur Crane, had vanished when Elliot was 9 years old. The official explanation had been suicide. His coat was found on the cliffs, folded beside a pair of shoes. No body was ever recovered. Elliot remembered very little about him. He remembered tobacco smoke, ink-stained fingers, a low voice reading bedtime stories. He also remembered the locked door at the end of the cellar and the sounds that sometimes came through it late at night. Tapping, scraping, and once the sound of a child laughing. My father made furniture, Elliot said. Your father made many things. Nora handed him one of the keys. It was long, black, and unusually heavy. This opens the cellar. Elliot looked at the covered figure. I am calling the police. The police will not come. There is a human tongue in its mouth. They have seen it before. Before Elliot could ask what she meant, a noise came from beneath the sheet. A wet clicking sound. Then his mother's voice whispered from behind the cloth. Elliot. His blood froze. The voice was unmistakable, weak, breathless, and intimate. The same voice that had called him downstairs for breakfast. The same voice that had screamed at him the night he left Saltgrave. Elliot, please. The covered head slowly turned toward him. Nora grabbed the chair and dragged it backward. The wooden legs shrieked against the floor. Do not answer it. The thing beneath the sheet began to sob. It sounded exactly like Evelyn Crane. I was alone, it cried. You left me alone. Elliot backed into the wall. The sobbing stopped. A moment of silence passed. Then the puppet laughed. The sound was high and brittle, like glass breaking in another room. Nora pulled Elliot into the kitchen and slammed the door. She locked it, pressed both hands against the wood, and listened. From the other side came 3 gentle knocks. Elliot could barely breathe. What is happening? Nora turned to him. Your father was not a furniture maker. He was an artificer. He created mechanical performers for the Grand Theatre. Lottie was the last one he completed before the theater closed. Mechanical performers, automata, puppets that moved without strings, figures that played instruments, danced, and spoke. Machines cannot speak in dead people's voices. These can. A floorboard creaked outside the kitchen. The doorknob rotated slowly. Nora continued in a whisper. Your family discovered a method of preserving voices, not recordings, the voices themselves. Your father believed sound left an imprint on living tissue. He said terror made the imprint stronger. Elliot stared at the door. The knob stopped turning. What does that mean? It means the tongue inside Lottie belonged to someone who died screaming. Something struck the other side of the door. The wood jumped in its frame. Elliot flinched. Nora unlocked the back entrance. We need to leave. Another impact cracked one of the panels. The puppet spoke in Evelyn's voice. You always run. Elliot followed Nora into the rain. They hurried through the narrow garden and into an alley behind the house. Rainwater rushed along the gutters. The sky had darkened to the color of bruised flesh. Elliot looked back. A small figure stood in the kitchen window. Its mismatched eyes reflected the fading light. Then the curtain fell across the glass. Nora led him to the cemetery. It occupied a sloping field behind an ancient stone church. Hundreds of graves faced the sea, their inscriptions worn smooth by salt and wind. The caretaker's cottage stood near the gate, surrounded by dead rose bushes. Inside, Nora lit several oil lamps. Elliot remained near the door, soaked and shaking. You knew about that thing. Yes, you knew my mother was living with it. She would not let me remove it. Why? Because she believed it contained your father's voice. Elliot laughed once, without humor. My father is dead. Nora took off her coat. Beneath it, she wore a high-collared black dress. A thin scar circled her throat, pale and raised, as though a cord had once been pulled tightly around her neck. Arthur Crane may be dead, she said, but his voice is not. She opened a cabinet and removed a leather ledger. Inside were newspaper clippings, photographs, and handwritten reports. The oldest photograph showed the Saltgrave Grand Theatre in its prime. A crowd stood beneath the entrance, beneath blazing lights. At the center was a thin man with slick black hair and a severe expression. Elliot recognized his grandfather, Victor Crane. Beside Victor stood 12 mechanical figures. There was a violinist with silver fingers, a dancer wearing a mask of white feathers, a laughing soldier with a drum strapped to his chest, a pair of identical boys holding hands, a tall woman in a red gown whose mouth opened far wider than any human mouth should, and Lottie, even in the faded photograph, her mismatched eyes seemed alive. Nora turned the page. The next photograph showed the theater's main auditorium after the final performance. Bodies filled the seats. Some were slumped forward. Some lay across the aisles. Others remained sitting upright, their faces turned toward the stage. Every corpse had its mouth torn open. Every tongue was missing. Elliot felt sick. What happened? The town called it the Saltgrave Massacre. 87 people died. The official story blamed poison gas from the theater's heating system. And the truth, the mechanical company performed without musicians that night. Witnesses outside said they heard singing from inside the building. They also heard applause. It continued for 2 hours after everyone was dead. Nora turned another page. A photograph showed the stage. The mechanical performers stood in a line. The tall woman in red occupied the center. Her jaw hung open to her chest. Within her mouth were dozens of tongues. They had been threaded together like strips of meat and wrapped around a copper wheel in her throat. Elliot shut the ledger. That is enough. No, it is not. Nora reopened it. The next page contained a photograph of Elliot's father. Arthur looked exhausted, his cheeks hollow and his eyes wild. He stood beside the tall woman from the stage, holding a hammer. Your father returned to the theater years after the massacre, Nora said. He believed the machines were not responsible. He believed something had entered them during the final performance. Something, he called it the listener. A cold gust rattled the windows. Elliot glanced toward the dark cemetery. Nora continued. According to Arthur, the listener could not create sound. It could only steal it and repeat it. Every cry of fear made it stronger. Every voice it consumed gave it another mask. Elliot thought of Lottie speaking in his mother's voice. What does it want? To be heard. Lightning flashed beyond the sea. For an instant, Elliot saw a child standing among the graves. Yellow dress, black curls, then darkness returned. He moved closer to the window. Lottie stood beside Evelyn Crane's grave. One small wooden hand rested against the fresh soil. Nora, she joined him. Lottie lifted her face. Her jaw opened, even through the glass and rain. Elliot heard his mother scream. It was the scream of someone experiencing the final moment of a violent death. The sound was raw and animal. It rose above the storm and cut into Elliot's skull. Lights appeared in nearby houses. Curtains opened. Dogs began barking throughout the town. Nora blew out the lamps. Get down. They crouched beneath the window. The scream continued until it became a choking gurgle. Then came applause. At first it sounded distant, a few hands clapping somewhere across town. Then more joined. Dozens, hundreds. The noise rolled up from the streets and echoed between the houses. Elliot covered his ears. What is that? The theater is waking. A bell rang on the cliff. One deep note. The Grand Theater's bell had not sounded in 34 years. It rang again. In the cottage cellar, something began pounding beneath the floor. Nora's face changed. What is down there? Elliot asked. She stood and took a lamp. Records. The cellar door trembled. A crack appeared in the frame. Nora opened a drawer and removed a revolver. Stay behind me. The door burst inward. A hunched mechanical creature crawled into the room. It had once been shaped like a violinist. Remnants of a black suit hung from its wooden torso. One silver hand clutched a broken bow. Its face had split from forehead to chin, revealing brass gears turning beneath the painted skin. A length of human intestine was wound around its other arm, like a glistening rope. The figure raised the violin. The instrument was made from a human rib cage. It drew the bow across the strings. A shriek filled the cottage. The sound was not music. It was the combined agony of everyone whose flesh had been stretched across the instrument. Elliot collapsed to his knees. Blood ran from his left ear. Nora fired. The bullet struck the figure's shoulder, blasting away splinters of wood. The violinist continued playing. Nora fired again. The second bullet entered its open face. Gears shattered. Black fluid sprayed across the wall. The creature lurched forward and swung the bow. The sharp end pierced Nora's side. She gasped. The violinist pulled the weapon free, tearing cloth and flesh. Blood poured down her dress. Elliot seized an iron poker from beside the fireplace and brought it down on the creature's neck. Once, twice, the wooden spine cracked. On the third strike, the head broke free. The body remained standing. Its silver fingers continued moving over the violin strings. Elliot drove the poker into its chest. The creature collapsed. The music stopped. For several seconds, there was only Nora's ragged breathing. Then the severed head spoke from the floor. A man's voice emerged from its broken mouth. Elliot. He recognized the voice despite the years that had passed. His father. Elliot stared at it. Son, the head said, you must come to the theater. Nora kicked it into the fireplace. Flames spread across its painted hair. The head screamed in several voices at once. A child, an old woman, a man begging for mercy. Then Arthur Crane's voice rose above the others. She is waiting beneath the stage. Elliot watched the porcelain face blacken. Who is waiting? The burning mouth smiled. Your mother. The head split apart with a sound like a gunshot. Nora leaned against the table. Blood seeped between her fingers. Elliot helped her into a chair and examined the wound. The bow had entered beneath her ribs. The cut was deep, but the bleeding slowed when he pressed a folded towel against it. We need a doctor. No doctor in Saltgrave will leave home tonight. Then we drive out of town. The roads will already be closed. By whom? Nora looked toward the cliff. By them. The theater bell rang again. From every house in Saltgrave came the sound of doors opening. People stepped into the rain. Men and women emerged in nightclothes and coats. Children followed barefoot. Their expressions were blank. They began walking uphill toward the theater. Elliot saw them through the cottage window. What are they doing? They heard the applause. Nora gripped his wrist. Once you hear it, part of you wants to join the audience. Elliot realized his right hand was moving. His palm struck his left. Clap. He pulled his hands apart in horror. They came together again. Clap. Pain spread through his wrists as he fought against himself. Nora slapped him. The urge vanished. Do not listen to the rhythm, she said. Think of another sound. Elliot focused on the storm. Rain on glass, wind against stone. Nora struggled to her feet. We have to reach the theater before the town does. Why? Because your mother was right. Lottie must never be taken there. Elliot looked toward the cemetery. The grave was empty. Small footprints led from the disturbed soil to the road. Lottie was gone. They drove Nora's ancient estate car up the hill. The streets were crowded with silent townspeople. They moved together beneath the rain, climbing with the patience of sleepwalkers. Elliot sounded the horn. No one looked back. He swerved around them, struck a rubbish bin, and continued toward the cliff. Near the town square, he saw the first body. The fisherman from the harbor, hung from a street lamp. Copper wire had been wrapped around his wrists and ankles, bending his limbs into a grotesque imitation of a dancing puppet. His stomach had been opened. Loops of intestine swung beneath him, brushing the wet pavement. His mouth was empty. A mechanical boy sat on the lamp above the corpse. It held the fisherman's tongue between its fingers and licked rainwater from it. As the car passed, the boy waved. Elliot accelerated. More figures appeared along the street. The soldier from the photograph marched beside the crowd, striking his drum. The drumskin had been made from a human face, stretched so tightly that the lips widened each time the sticks struck. Two identical wooden boys skipped between the townspeople. Their hands were joined by a strip of raw flesh. A woman stumbled from an alley and begged Elliot to stop. He slowed. Nora saw the thin wires attached to the woman's back. Keep driving. The wires tightened. The woman's body jerked upright. Wooden hooks tore through her shoulders, lifting her from the ground. Her mouth opened as she screamed. A white masked dancer descended from the roof above her. The dancer pulled the wires. The woman spun in the rain, arms flailing, feet scraping across the road. Each turn tightened the wires around her bones. Elliot heard the wet crack of her shoulders dislocating. The dancer pulled harder. One arm tore free. It struck the car's windscreen and became lodged beneath the wiper, fingers twitching. Elliot screamed and swerved. The car mounted the pavement, struck a stone fountain, and stopped. Steam poured from the crushed bonnet. Nora pressed both hands against her wound. We walk from here. The Grand Theatre loomed above them. Its entrance stood open. Golden light spilled down the steps. The townspeople entered in silence. Elliot and Nora slipped through a side passage used by performers. The corridor beyond smelled of dust, mold, and hot machinery. Gas lamps burned along the walls. Elliot touched one. The metal was warm. The theater was alive. Somewhere beyond the corridor, an orchestra tuned its instruments. Nora led him through a dressing room filled with cracked mirrors. Words had been carved into the glass. Give them your voice. Join the final performance. Never leave your seat. Elliot saw movement in the mirrors. Figures stood behind them. He turned. The room was empty. In the glass, however, the figures remained. A dozen dead performers watched from the reflected doorway. Their costumes were soaked in blood. Their mouths were black holes. One raised a finger to its lips. Nora covered the largest mirror with a curtain. The dead vanished from the others. What was that? Elliot whispered. Memories. Whose memories? The theater's. They reached a stairwell, descending beneath the stage. The sounds of the audience grew louder. Seats creaked. Wet shoes shuffled across carpet. No one spoke. Elliot imagined hundreds of people sitting in darkness, waiting for the curtain to rise. At the bottom of the stairs stood a heavy iron door. Arthur Crane's name had been scratched across it. Elliot used the black key from his mother's house. The lock opened. Beyond the door lay his father's workshop. Rows of mechanical heads filled the shelves. Some were wooden. Others were porcelain, iron, wax, or bone. Hundreds of glass eyes reflected Elliot's lamp. Work tables were covered with tools. Copper pipes ran across the ceiling and disappeared into a massive machine at the center of the room. It resembled an organ. Instead of musical pipes, it contained glass cylinders filled with cloudy liquid. Human tongues floated inside them. Some were pale and shriveled. Others looked fresh. Wires had been inserted through the flesh and attached to brass keys. Elliot approached the machine. A tongue twitched inside one cylinder. A whisper emerged from the organ. Please. Another voice joined it. Help us. Then another. It hurts. Soon the workshop filled with murmuring voices. Men, women, and children pleaded from within the glass. Nora found a stack of journals. She opened the newest volume. The final entry had been written by Arthur Crane. The listener is not a spirit. It is an emptiness. A hunger formed in the first silence before the world began. It cannot live where there is no one to hear it. It entered the theater through our machines because we gave it mouths without souls. Now it wants a perfect voice. It wants my son. Elliot read the sentence again. My father built these things for me. Nora's expression was grim. Your voice was unusual when you were a child. Do you remember the songs your mother taught you? Elliot did. A lullaby with no words. His mother used to sit beside his bed and hum the melody while the wind scraped branches against the windows. She said my father wrote it. He did not. The melody came from the listener. Your father heard it in his dreams. The organ released a sigh. Every tongue inside the cylinders turned toward Elliot. Nora searched the desk and found a metal case. Inside were wax recordings labeled with dates. One bore Elliot's name. Age 7. She placed it on a phonograph. The cylinder began to rotate. A child's voice filled the room. Elliot's voice. He was singing the wordless lullaby. Behind the song came another sound. A deep inhalation. Something breathing through the child. The recording ended with Arthur Crane speaking. "He is ready." Elliot stepped away. My mother knew. She discovered what Arthur planned. On the night of the massacre, she tried to destroy the theater. She set a fire beneath the stage, but the listener used the audience to extinguish it. Why did she not tell me? She believed forgetting would protect you. A small voice came from the doorway. It did not. Lottie stood at the bottom of the stairs. Her yellow dress was wet. Mud covered her wooden shoes. She held something in both hands. Evelyn Crane's severed head. Elliot stopped breathing. The head had been dug from the grave. Soil filled the eye sockets. Gray hair clung to the decomposed scalp in wet clumps. The lower jaw hung loose. Lottie pushed one hand into the neck and raised the head like a puppet. Evelyn's jaw moved. "Hello, darling." Elliot made a broken sound. Nora raised the revolver. Lottie tilted the corpse's head. "You should not point that at your mother." Nora fired. Lottie moved with impossible speed. The bullet struck the wall. The puppet leaped onto a table and hurled Evelyn's head at Nora. Nora ducked. The head struck the organ. Several cylinders shattered. Preserving fluid poured across the floor. Tongues landed with wet slaps and began writhing like wounded worms. The voices inside them screamed. Lottie sprang at Elliot. Her small body struck his chest with the force of a falling stone. He crashed against the table. Her ivory teeth snapped inches from his face. The human tongue writhed inside her mouth. Elliot held her throat with both hands. The wooden skin felt warm. Lottie spoke in his father's voice. "Sing for me." Her jaw stretched wider. A second mouth opened inside the first. It was soft, red, and human. Rows of needle-shaped teeth pushed through the gums. Elliot grabbed a chisel from the table and drove it into her green eye. The glass burst. Lottie shrieked. The sound shifted through dozens of stolen voices. She struck Elliot across the face and tore open his cheek. Her fingers ended in metal points. One entered the corner of his mouth and ripped through the flesh toward his ear. Elliot screamed. Lottie froze. Her remaining eye brightened. The organ responded. Every key pressed itself down. Elliot's scream echoed from the pipes, louder and deeper. The tongues on the floor began crawling toward him. Nora seized Lottie from behind and threw her into the machine. Glass exploded. Lottie disappeared within a cloud of fluid and shattered brass. "Run," Nora said. They fled the workshop and climbed toward the stage. Behind them, the organ began playing Elliot's childhood lullaby. The melody followed them through the walls. At the top of the staircase, Nora collapsed. Her face had become gray. Blood covered the front of her dress. Elliot knelt beside her. "You cannot stop. I am not leaving you." She pulled his hand away from her wound. Something moved beneath the torn flesh. A thin copper wire had been left inside her body. It wriggled deeper between her ribs. Nora clenched her teeth and dug 2 fingers into the wound. Elliot tried to stop her. She pushed deeper. Her body shook. At last, she pulled the wire free. A small brass hook was attached to the end. A piece of her lung came with it. She coughed blood across the floor. Elliot stared at the glistening fragment. Nora laughed weakly. I think I needed that. A shadow moved above them. The white, masked dancer clung to the ceiling. Wires descended from her fingers. Elliot dragged Nora aside. The hooks struck the floor. One caught the edge of Nora's dress. The dancer pulled. Nora was yanked across the corridor. Elliot grabbed her hands. The fabric tightened around her waist. More wires descended. One hook pierced Nora's thigh. Another entered her back. She cried out. The dancer began lifting her. Elliot held on until his shoulders burned. Nora looked down at him. Let go. No. You have to reach the stage. I said no. The dancer pulled harder. Nora's skin stretched around the hooks. Blood flowed down her legs. She whispered, Elliot, please. For one terrible second, he remembered the voice from beneath the sheet in his mother's house. He wondered whether it was truly Nora speaking. Her eyes softened. You cannot repair everything. The dancer jerked the wires. Nora's body rose. Her fingers slipped from Elliot. She was pulled into the darkness above. Elliot heard her strike the ceiling. Then came a series of wet, tearing sounds. Blood rained into the corridor. A portion of Nora's dress fell beside him. Nothing else returned. Elliot ran. He reached the stage door as the orchestra began to play. Through a gap in the curtains, he saw the auditorium. Every seat was occupied. The people of Saltgrave sat perfectly still, their soaked clothing dripping onto the carpet. Their eyes were open. Their mouths had been sewn shut with black thread. On the stage stood the mechanical company. The silver-handed violinist had been repaired. The soldier waited behind his drum. The dancer turned slowly on blood-stained toes. The identical boys smiled at one another. At the center stood the tall woman in red. She was nearly 8 feet tall. Her gown clung to a narrow wooden body. Black hair fell to her waist. Her face was beautiful, almost human, except for the jaw. It opened in 4 sections. Within her throat, hundreds of tongues rotated around a copper wheel. Lottie stood beside her. The chisel remained buried in her broken eye. She held Evelyn Crane's head by the hair. The audience applauded. The black stitches across their mouths tore through their cheeks as their jaws moved. Blood ran down their chins. The tall woman curtsied. When she straightened, every tongue inside her throat spoke together. Elliot Crane. He stepped onto the stage. The audience stopped clapping. Hundreds of heads turned toward him. The tall woman extended one hand. Her wooden fingers were long and delicate. Your father promised us your song. Elliot looked toward the orchestra pit. There were no musicians. Human corpses had been arranged in chairs, their arms attached to mechanical rods. The rods forced their rotten hands across violins and cellos. Several bodies had decayed so severely that the instruments cut through their fingers. The melody continued. Elliot walked toward the center of the stage. "What are you?" The tall woman smiled. "We are everything that was never spoken." Her voice changed with every word. His mother, his father, Nora, strangers, children, the dead. Lottie lifted Evelyn's head. His mother's jaw moved. "Sing, darling." Elliot looked at the townspeople. Among them, he recognized teachers, shopkeepers, neighbors, and people who had watched him grow up, their mouth strained against the stitches. They were conscious. They were terrified. The listener had silenced them, but had left them able to hear. Elliot understood. It needed an audience. Without listeners, it was nothing. He turned toward the tall woman. "My father thought my voice would make you complete. Your voice will allow us to leave this place. And if I refuse?" Lottie smiled. The soldier struck his drum. A woman in the front row convulsed. Her abdomen split open. A mechanical hand emerged from inside her body, pushing through loops of intestine. It climbed from the wound, dragging a small wooden torso behind it. The woman tried to scream through her stitched mouth. Her cheeks tore. The infant-sized puppet crawled onto her lap and began chewing through her tongue from the outside, biting through her chin to reach it. Elliot looked away. The tall woman touched his wounded cheek. Her fingers entered the torn flesh. Pain exploded across his face. He refused to cry out. She leaned closer. "You will sing." Elliot saw movement behind the curtains. Nora stood in the shadows. Her dress hung in strips. Blood covered her face. Hooks remained buried in her shoulders and thighs. For a moment, hope rose inside him. Then she stepped into the light. Her feet did not touch the floor. Copper wires held her body upright. The dancer controlled her from above. Nora's head lifted. Her throat had been opened. The wound widened as wires pulled the skin apart. A voice emerged from inside her chest. "Sing." Elliot stared into her dead eyes. The tall woman turned toward the audience. "Tonight, Saltgrave shall hear the voice that opens every mouth." The orchestra stopped. Silence filled the theater. Elliot could hear the rain against the roof. He could hear the audience breathing through their noses. He could hear gears turning inside the performers. Beneath all of it, he heard something vast, a presence waiting behind the walls, an emptiness listening from the spaces between each heartbeat. Elliot began to hum, the lullaby his mother had taught him. The mechanical figures trembled with excitement. The tall woman opened her four-part jaw. The wheel of tongues spun faster. Elliot continued humming. The sound passed through the theater. Lights flickered. Dust fell from the ceiling. The audience leaned forward. Lottie's smile widened. Elliot closed his eyes. He remembered his mother beside his childhood bed. He remembered the night she taught him the final note. She had stopped humming and placed one finger against his lips. never finish the song, she had whispered. The ending does not belong to us. Elliot reached the final passage. Then he stopped. The theater groaned. The tall woman's head snapped toward him. Continue. Elliot remained silent. The listener pressed against the walls. The building shook. Lottie screamed in Evelyn's voice. Finish it. Elliot looked at the audience. Their eyes begged him not to obey. He understood what his mother had hidden within the song. The melody was not an invitation. It was a cage. As long as the final note remained unspoken, the listener was trapped inside its endless anticipation. Elliot stepped backward. No. The tall woman seized his throat. Her fingers tightened. The wooden tips pierced his skin. Sing. Elliot could not breathe. Darkness gathered at the edges of his vision. Lottie climbed his body and gripped his jaw. Her metal fingers forced his mouth open. The human tongue inside her mouth stretched toward his. It slid between his lips. The dead flesh was cold and swollen. Elliot gagged. Lottie's inner teeth scraped his gums. The tall woman spoke in Nora's voice. Give it what it wants. Elliot reached for the chisel buried in Lottie's eye. He pulled it free. Black fluid poured down her face. He drove the chisel through her open mouth. The blade passed through the human tongue and struck the machinery behind it. Lottie convulsed. Elliot twisted the tool. The tongue split apart. A deafening chorus erupted from her body. Every voice she had stolen escaped at once. Elliot heard his mother cry his name. He heard his father begging for forgiveness. He heard dozens of strangers release their final screams. The pressure shattered the lamps. Darkness swallowed the stage. The tall woman released him. Elliot fell. The audience began screaming through their torn mouths. The listener fed on the sound. The theater walls swelled inward. The red curtains billowed as though the building had inhaled. Elliot realized his mistake. Fear strengthened it. He crawled toward the edge of the stage and pulled himself upright. Stop screaming, he shouted. No one heard him. The mechanical performers descended upon the audience. The soldier swung his drumsticks, breaking skulls. Each impact released a burst of applause from the human face stretched across the drum. The identical boys leaped across the seats, pulling black thread from people's mouths. Skin tore away in long strips. The white dancer lowered Nora's corpse into the crowd. Hooks shot from Nora's fingers and buried themselves in the eyes of the living. The tall woman moved toward Elliot. Her body unfolded as she walked. Extra limbs emerged beneath her gown. 6 wooden arms, then 8. Her red dress split open, revealing a rib cage constructed from human jawbones. At its center pulsed a dark mass. It was not a heart. It was a hole, a perfect circle of darkness that consumed every sound near it. Elliot could not hear his own breathing. The tall woman rushed at him. He rolled aside. Her arms struck the stage, tearing through the boards. Elliot saw the orchestra pit below. Gas lines ran beneath the floor. His mother had once tried to burn the theater. She had failed because the audience extinguished the fire. Tonight, the audience was trapped. Elliot hated himself for the thought that followed. He grabbed a fallen lamp. The flame still burned. The tall woman pulled herself from the floor. "Your mother tried that." Elliot held the lamp over the pit. The tall woman's voices became gentle. "Do not hurt them." The townspeople continued dying in the seats. The mechanical infants crawled through bodies. The soldier crushed a man's head between his drumsticks. The white dancer pulled a young girl into the balcony by hooks embedded in her mouth. The girl's jaw tore away. Her body fell, striking the seats below. Elliot looked at the tall woman. "You need them alive. We need them listening. Then listen to this." He dropped the lamp. Flames struck the gas line. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the orchestra pit erupted. Fire rolled across the stage. The dead musicians ignited in their chairs. Their dry flesh burned instantly, filling the air with the smell of cooked meat and old perfume. The flames reached the curtains. The tall woman shrieked. Her voices separated into 1,000 cries. Elliot ran toward the auditorium. Mechanical figures burned around him. The soldier's drumskin tightened in the heat until the human face split apart. Burning fat sprayed across the seats. The identical boys clung to each other as flames consumed their painted hair. Their joined hands melted into a single black mass. The white dancer spun faster and faster, spreading fire with her dress. Nora's body dropped from the wires. Elliot caught her. She was lighter than he expected. Her head rested against his shoulder. For a fleeting moment, her dead lips moved. "Thank you." Then her body collapsed into ash. Elliot climbed through the audience, cutting stitches from mouths with the chisel. "Get out," he shouted. People rose in panic. Some trampled those who had fallen. Others remained seated, staring toward the stage as though unable to look away. The listener's dark heart expanded. It consumed the roar of the fire. Flames bent toward it. The tall woman crawled across the ceiling, her limbs piercing the plaster. Lottie dragged herself after Elliot. Half her face had melted. Her lower body was gone. She pulled herself between the seats, using both arms, leaving a trail of burning oil. Evelyn Crane's head rolled beside her. "Elliot," it called. He ignored it. "Elliot, help me." He continued, cutting the audience free. The corpse's voice changed. His mother no longer sounded frightened. She sounded angry. "You abandoned me." Elliot stopped. Lottie smiled through the flames. "You left me to die alone." He turned toward the head. Soil fell from its empty eyes. Elliot remembered the letter. "If it speaks in my voice, do not answer." He forced himself to walk away. The head screamed after him. "You were a terrible son." Elliot reached the aisle. Most of the townspeople were fleeing through the main doors. The theater ceiling cracked. Burning beams crashed onto the balcony. The grand chandelier fell, crushing those who had not escaped. Crystal and bone exploded across the seats. Elliot reached the entrance. Behind him, the tall woman dropped from the ceiling. Her burning body blocked the aisle. All 8 arms spread. The black heart in her chest had grown large enough to fill her torso. Inside it, Elliot saw faces, not reflections. People, thousands of them, suspended in endless darkness, mouths open, unable to release a sound. Arthur Crane's face appeared among them. His eyes met Elliot. His lips formed 2 words. "I am sorry." The tall woman lunged. Elliot stepped aside and drove the chisel into the darkness. There was no resistance. His arm entered the hole, up to the shoulder. Cold surrounded him. The theater vanished. For one instant, Elliot stood in a place without light or sound. The listener filled the emptiness. It had no shape. It was awareness without life, hunger without a body. It showed him the beginning of the world, when the first living creature released the first cry of pain. It had been there, listening. It showed him every scream that followed. Birth, war, murder, grief. Every sound of terror had given it form. Every frightened listener had given it somewhere to live. It offered Elliot a place within itself. His voice would never fade. His mother would speak to him forever. Nora would rise again. His father would return. All Elliot had to do was complete the song. He felt the final note inside his throat. It pressed against his tongue. He wanted to release it. Instead, Elliot closed his mouth. He seized the darkness with both hands. There was something within it. A wire. The first wire his grandfather had used to connect the listener to the machines. Elliot pulled. The tall woman convulsed. Her arms struck the walls. The wire cut into Elliot's palms. He pulled harder. A copper cord emerged from the black heart. It seemed to have no end. Faces rushed past within the darkness. The stolen dead screamed silently. Elliot wrapped the wire around his hands and leaned backward. The tall woman's chest began to collapse. The hole shrank. The listener resisted. Images flooded Elliot's mind. His mother alive in the kitchen. Nora smiling beneath summer sunlight. His father returning home. A life without abandonment. A life without guilt. Elliot pulled again. The wire tore free. Sound returned with catastrophic force. The theater exploded around him. Every stolen voice burst from the machines. Windows shattered across Saltgrave. The ocean cliffs trembled. The tall woman's body split open. Tongues poured from her throat in a glistening flood. They struck the burning carpet and writhed in the flames. Lottie released one final cry. It was not Elliot's mother. It was the terrified scream of a little girl. For the first time, Elliot understood that Lottie had once been human. Then the puppet collapsed. The remaining roof gave way. Elliot ran through the entrance as the theater fell behind him. Stone angels crashed down the steps. A wave of fire burst from the windows and climbed into the rain. Elliot rolled across the wet ground. The people of Saltgrave gathered on the road below. Some were wounded. Many were covered in blood. They watched the theater burn. No one applauded. By dawn, the Grand Theatre had become a smoking ruin. Authorities arrived from neighboring towns. They blamed an ancient gas system and unstable foundations. They counted 26 dead and dozens injured. They found no mechanical performers, no tongues, no evidence of the listener. Nora Wren's body was never recovered. Elliot remained in Saltgrave for 3 weeks. He buried his mother again in a sealed coffin. He repaired the door of her house. He burned every journal from his father's workshop that had survived the fire. Then he returned to London. For several months, he slept with the lights on. He stopped restoring antiques. Old objects unsettled him. He could no longer look at carved faces without imagining glass eyes turning toward him. The wound in his cheek healed into a thick red scar. The cuts on his palms did not, no matter how often he changed the bandages. Thin, dark lines remained beneath the skin. They resembled copper wire. One night, nearly a year after the fire, Elliot received a package. There was no return address. Inside was a wax recording cylinder. A note had been wrapped around it. For Elliot, the handwriting belonged to Nora. He should have destroyed it. Instead, he placed the cylinder on an antique phonograph. The recording began with silence. Then came the sound of rainfall. A theater bell rang in the distance. Nora's voice whispered from the speaker, "Elliot, you did not kill it." He stepped away. The recording continued. "You only removed it from the machines." Something knocked inside the phonograph. 3 gentle taps. Elliot stared at the speaker. Nora began to cry. It needed a living body. The cuts in Elliot's palms opened. Copper wire pushed through the flesh. It curled around his fingers. He tried to scream, but his jaw locked. The phonograph needle lifted by itself. A familiar lullaby filled the room. Elliot's throat moved. The final note rose inside him. He pressed both hands over his mouth. Across the street, lights appeared in neighboring windows. People approached the glass. They were listening. The wires beneath Elliot's skin climbed his arms. They entered his shoulders. His spine straightened. His head turned toward the window. He watched his reflection in the dark glass. His lips were closed, but the reflection was smiling. Behind him stood Nora. Hooks pierced her shoulders. Her throat hung open. The white masked dancer held her wires. Elliot's reflection raised one finger to its lips. Then someone in the apartment above began to applaud. One pair of hands, slow, patient, waiting for the performance to begin. Elliot's mouth opened. From somewhere deep inside him, his mother's voice began to sing. And far away, in the ruins of the Saltgrave Grand Theatre, hundreds of buried tongues answered. So listeners, Should an unmarked package ever appear outside your door, do not bring it inside. Should an old recording speak in the voice of someone you have lost, do not answer. And if you hear applause coming from an empty room, remain silent. The performance may already have begun. Thank you for joining me tonight on Whispers in the Dark. Remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this story with someone who enjoys listening after midnight. Until we meet again, keep the doors locked, keep the lights low, and never trust a voice that speaks from the darkness. Good night.
Whispers of a love so true, painting dreams of me and you. And I'll hold you close in this moment so divine. Whispers of